Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Good. Have a special subject I'd like to talk a little bit with you on, and it was in the news this week, and it has to do with torturing. Torturing is a rather evil thing to do, but it's in the news. They did a recent poll, and it was disappointing to me that the way the questions are answered or whatever, or the attitude of the people, they didn't give libertarian answers or even reasonable answers, but like 65% of the American people say, yeah, go to it, torture them, because we have to torture jihadists, you know, we're going to save the world by that way. So that to me is rather discouraging, but we all remember seeing the pictures of torture not too long ago at Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib, and it probably did more harm than anything because they spread all through the Arab world, and it radicalized the people because of the way we were treating another human being. But the whole thing is they talk about torture and they come up with all these justifications why torture is necessary. You're going to stop an atomic explosion because you're going to torture somebody, and they're going to tell you the truth under these circumstances. But the whole thing is, though, it hasn't been a very practical thing to do, and yet I was discouraged so much because there's such strong support. But the candidates seem to support it too, and that might be a reflection of the people, or the people are reflecting the leaders. Which way do you think it is? What's going on?
Well, I think these polls can actually be used to propagandize the population. You know, there are so many ways of asking a question, of framing a question, of attempting to get the right result. We know that most Americans, if they get the feeling that most Americans support something, most people won't stand up and say, no, I'm against it, you know. And so I think when a poll is asked like this and it's framed in a way that if you say no, you somehow would support an attack, then you have this 60%, and then it's broadcast in the media, and people get the idea, well, I guess everyone supports it, I guess it's okay. So it serves kind of a diabolical purpose in a way of making it okay. And here we thought we had this discussion 10 years ago when everyone was disgusted by what we saw, and we found out how many innocent people were tortured, their lives ruined, et cetera, et cetera.
You know, they mess around with the polls, then they become the propaganda tool, and they use that to build the momentum. Then, of course, definitions aren't used. One definition that they never want you to know about, because do you believe that a terrorist should be tortured to be told, to make him tell us, you know, some very important information? Oh yeah, we don't want him to blow up the city, you know. But they never say, well, who is he? Is he a jihadist? Is he a criminal? Did he commit a crime? Or is he just an arbitrary suspect? You know, there were a few that ended up even in Guantanamo that had never committed a crime. They were the wrong people, and they were teenagers, but they were stuck in there. So they, in a way, probably were tortured and kept there for years. That's a bit of torture. So, but this whole idea, even if you wanted to support torture of terrorists, that's a lot different than anybody who's suspected of a crime, or anybody who's turned in by their enemies, and we were susceptible to that. They'd come along and say, Joe down the street, he's one of the bad guys, go get him, and then we go get him and we do this torture. It to me is such a serious crime. The crime is that we are so casual about using this evil, ancient tradition of torturing people. It's been around as long as mankind's been around. I thought in a more civilized society there might be something else if we become more intelligent and understand what the human condition is all about.
Well, this might sound conspiratorial, but it's actually fact. We know that the CIA and intelligence services are involved in Hollywood. They're very active. They do consulting for different movies, and there is a very close relationship between those that make popular culture and those that drive our foreign policy. This is a fact. So the whole idea of the ticking time bomb scenario comes out of fiction, comes out of television programs like 24, where in every episode he was dashing off to defuse a bomb. In the real world where we're supposed to be living, this scenario does not happen. The Senate investigation on torture found that this scenario never happened. It was never the case. So this is the figment of the imagination of Washington, probably influenced by the intelligence agencies.
And they use the excuse to excuse themselves for doing these kind of things, and maybe all they're doing is practicing a little vengeance. But you know, if you extended this to a domestic situation, let's say these people who love torture, say they have a son that's 15 years of age and he wanders down the streets and gets mixed up, not in a serious way, but he's in there involved with about 25 kids, and they were really a drug gang, but he gets dragged in by mistake. But you could argue, you know, this is a drug gang. These people are selling drugs, and there's a drug dealer out there. They're killing our kids, and we have to get that drug dealer, and they know who they are. But this innocent kid gets dragged in. But the government said they're just suspects. So let's start torturing so we can get to the real source of it. Now, what would the parent who's so anxious to permit torture of terrorists, so-called terrorists, suspects, would he sit there and watch his kid? Well, yeah, he's a suspect. He might know, and he knows darn well that he's innocent. His emotions and reaction would be completely different. Of course, they would use this as an extreme example, but like you point out, even the ticking time bomb is an extreme example. It has nothing to do with common decency.
And so what they will do is play games with semantics. You know, this is incredibly important. The word torture must be excised from the lexicon of our society, according to the neocons. You know, Connor Friedstorff, who's often writes very good things in The Atlantic, did a piece not long ago about the fallacy of the ticking time bomb, and he quoted extensively Jonah Goldberg, who's the neocon editor of the National Review Online, a huge supporter of torture, like all of these unfortunate wayward so-called conservatives. But here's what Goldberg's point is. The problem is really the word torture. That's the problem. And here's a quote. One of the great problems with the word torture is that it tolerates no ambiguity. It's a taboo word like racism or incest. Once you call something torture, the conversation is supposed to end. So his solution, don't call it torture.
Yeah. What's the enhancement technique? They change the wording, make it sound better?
Yeah, enhanced interrogation.
Enhanced interrogation. Oh, sure. Then that's not torture. But you know, the one thing that we don't talk about, we talk about it, but in the context of the torture, is why are we in this mess? Why do we have Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib and this? I remember World War II, torture went on, and the Japs did it, and the Americans probably did it, but it wasn't, you know, the big issue. But now it is, because it's ongoing. It's been going on for 15 years now, of all these arrests and things. So the real problem is we won't admit that some of this critical analysis and the critical need to get this information is a consequence of putting ourselves in a place we should have never been on. You know, if we'd have had a non-interventionist foreign policy, think of how many lives, American lives, we would have saved. Think how many innocent Arab and Muslim lives we would have saved. And think how much less torture would have become a necessity. But no, there's no discussion in context of why we're there or why we shouldn't be there. And yet, to me, that might be the most important thing to talk about.
There's no talk about interventionism and how it created it. You know, I was reading earlier today, I forget the name, but an Iraqi MP rejected U.S. Blaming Iraq for the creation of ISIS. They said, you invaded us, you destroyed our economy, you destroyed our society, in the void left by your intervention, ISIS developed. So don't blame us for it. And this is the same thing. Our intervention created these terrorists.
And they can be radicalized too, not only because of the reality, but by the propagandists of those who wanted to be radical, and they energize people. And then when there is a vicious killing, of course, it gets plastered and it's used as a propaganda tool, and so on and on. But there are some examples in our own history and our own domestic operations that are close to being torture. I keep thinking about our friend Aaron Schiff. I mean, here's a guy that all he believed in was the First Amendment, to go out and lecture on why he thought the IRS, the way they collected revenues, was unconstitutional. Never committed a violent crime. And he was killed by our government by giving him a death sentence and chaining him to a bed and not letting him get proper medical care. Now, is that torture or what? I mean, that is not justice. It's a violation of the First Amendment. I just think it is a tragic case. But we got to protect the state. If we don't have an iron fist with the IRS, how are we going to pay for these wars? You know, this sort of thing. That to me, gets pretty close to torturing him and his family and everybody else. But there must be dozens and dozens of cases like this that people get caught up in this judicial system. If you don't have money and a good attorney, you can get sentenced, and there's plea bargaining. It's such an unfair system. That's different than, I know, the torture that we're talking about here. But there's different ways governments can torture a people.
Yeah, we'll look at Chelsea Manning, who had just recently wrote an article about how torturous extended solitary confinement was. He's paying the price for revealing some of the crimes that our government did. So that's certainly torturous. But we're now, unfortunately, we thought that we had dealt with this back in the 10 years ago when Abu Ghraib came out. But now, because of the presidential campaign, because things have gotten so animated among the candidates, that we're now discussing torture again, and the major candidates for the presidency have a pretty mixed record when it comes to how they feel about torture. Some a lot worse than others, but none of them we would rather have here with us at the table agreeing with us.
No, and that is the problem, and that's the sentiment. They're changing the mood of the country, and the mood of the country is they support people like this. But there's a lot of other things that's not exactly torture, but it's torturous, and that is people get killed because of our policy. One most annoying thing is the kill list. The president sits down and talks about who should be on the kill list, and they go out and they send a drone to kill them, and they're killing suspects is what they're doing. They, get information. And the other thing is, what about a program where you actually condone and legalize killing civilians and killing family members? I mean, that's torture to the families of people who lose loved ones and they have not participated in anything. But that's going on all the time. They said that's different. We want to get information. Torture's to get some information, but there's no evidence that any serious crime was ever prevented by torture and extracting information.
I think that's such a great point because, looking at the four main candidates now, I would say Bernie Sanders, in terms of torture, is probably the best because he criticizes it from a moral perspective. But then again, as you say, he supports the president's kill list, which is a form of torture, of never knowing when you might be killed, even as collateral damage or in a signature strike or other things.
We have a former candidate for president that he wasn't my favorite. I'm sure he wasn't yours, by the name of John McCain. Actually, he's taken a position, and I think he stayed pretty solid on his position against torture. Of course, he was exposed to it, so that may be one thing that they ought to talk to him more about why these people haven't gone through it, and he has gone through it.
Well, I got some bad news for you. Sorry to interrupt, though, but he unfortunately has fallen to the ticking time bomb scenario, though.
Oh boy!
So he's I'm against torture, but ...
Well, that's sort of like Sanders. We would have predicted that he wouldn't endorse kill lists.
Yeah.
So we find out that he endorsed that. But what about the CIA directors? Some on the recent articles are saying, well, boy, the CIA directors, Hayden and others are saying that torture isn't good and we are not against and not for this. And I thought, wow, is that great? They may well have been involved themselves. But I just wonder whether that might be something that the establishment is using against Trump. Since Trump is out front on this, even the CIA, these ruthless people in the CIA are saying enough is enough and we won't do it, and the military won't even listen to these orders if a president does it. They don't use the word Trump, but they're probably targeting that at Trump. The issue of torture is probably not even there. I just wonder whether it might be just part of the establishment nibbling away and say, hey, we might not be able to control this Trump guy, and but they're using it in a positive way that he's over the top and he's going to order torture, and we're the good guys and we wouldn't dare even think about doing anything like that.
It's kind of crocodile tears from them because they were deeply involved in the torture program, and now they come out and say, well, the military is not going to obey the commander-in-chief if he's for torture, if he orders torture, So it's kind of rich coming from these guys who are the architects of the program.
Yeah, and that's been around for a bit, and unfortunately, I don't think we're going to solve that problem here real soon. But the principle of torture should be rejected. I think there's a main motivation there is total vengeance, and you can understand that emotion. But the one thing that the people who are for torture look at it in a narrow sense, that there are a bunch of bad guys there that are trying to kill us, and we're not going to think about our policy and how the policy is backfiring on us. That would be too painful. What we have to do is show how super patriotic we are, and we're willing to pull the fingernails out of anybody and do things much worse than waterboarding, because if we get this information, we might be able to save a life, which they've never been able to do, but at least they come across as being super pro-American. And that, I think, is just sort of sad that we're at that point. But overall, this is another consequence of bad policy that we have, a bad foreign policy, and one problem leads to another, and now they're once again talking about torture, and to me it's such a shame that now maybe 2/3 of American people can be talked into this, or at least ignore it. But they need to know the truth about this, that it doesn't do any good, that it's against all human nature to think that you can literally improve the world by torturing and adding up kill lists and targeting family members and call people who get killed by our bombs. Oh, that's collateral damage. We're not killing people. You know, we're killing people. We're involved in it. We're in nation building. We're over there, and we ought to challenge all that. And of course, under those circumstances, I don't think we would have torture chambers. They've been around probably for thousands of years. I think we ought to make some progress. Hopefully someday we can make enough progress to realize that even war is so much less necessary than most people believe. But first, we'd have to accept the principle of non-aggression as individuals. We'd have to accept the principle of non-aggression by the state. We'd have to accept the principle of no preemptive war, which was established about 10 years ago. And the American people say, oh yeah, we got to go over there and kill them there before they come here, even though they've never attacked us. So we have to come to a full understanding of what our policy ought to be and what aggression is all about. It is the willingness to reject the initiation of force and aggression against others, whether it's individual or whether it's by our government. That would go a long way to solving our problem. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.